This one's kind of hard to believe, but this little tiny cemetery contains the remains of Frank James, brother of Jesse James. This is William Hill Park, given to Jackson County as a public park by Joe Leslie Hill in memory of his father, pioneer resident of Jackson County. This is actually named after William Hill, who is buried right over there with Frank James. The odd thing about this cemetery is that there's a park here, and the cemetery is just a little section of it over here. I mean, this is no bigger than a residential yard, but there's a cemetery right here, and there's Frank James, Alexander Frank James, and his wife, Ann Ralston. Alexander Frank James, 1843 to 1915. His wife, Anna. She was from a wealthy family who lived not very far from here, 1853 to 1944. Look how many pennies have been placed on this grave. On her side, I wonder. What if that's a commentary on the families here? I do have to say that for such a legendary outlaw such as this guy, there's not much fanfare in this neighborhood for his grave, which is kind of puzzling to me because Frank James was probably just as big of a criminal as Jesse James, only he didn't get shot. Now, he was the one who spent his retirement years showing off the farm. He would charge an admission to see the James farm that we showed you earlier. And I guarantee you that if Frank had met the same fate that his brother Jesse met, that he would be hailed as this great Western outlaw like his brother. As a side note, I understand that Anne was devastated after Frank died. She said that her life was over, basically. And that was in a letter that I saw that she had written to somebody. Another thing should be noted is that his ashes are buried here, not his body. Although he lived much of his life as a violent outlaw, Frank James had been raised as a preacher's son, surrounded by books, and during his youth developed a love for the works of Shakespeare. In May 1861, Frank James joined a Confederate unit and fought at the Battle of Wilson's Creek. He came down with measles and was left behind and captured by Union soldiers. After taking the oath of allegiance to the United States, he was allowed to return home. He later joined the infamous guerrilla raiders William Clark Contrell and William Bloody Bill Anderson and participated in various assaults on Union troops. After the Civil War, Frank James returned to the family farm. By 1869, the James brothers were involved in a series of bank robberies and murders. For the next decade, Frank intermittently lived the life of an outlaw and private citizen. Following the failed bank robbery in Northfield, Minnesota on September 7, 1876, in which 2 robbers were killed along with 2 citizens, the James brothers settled in Nashville, Tennessee, living under aliases. Frank lived with his wife Ann Ralston and son Robert under the alias of B.J. Woodson and raised hogs and racehorses. Frank wanted to leave behind his criminal ways despite being coaxed by Jesse. 6 months after Jesse was killed, Frank turned himself over to Missouri Governor Thomas Crittenden. He reportedly unbuckled his gun belt and declared to the governor, quote, "I want to hand over to you that which no living man except myself has been permitted to touch since 1861, and to say that I am your prisoner." Frank James stood trial for robberies in Missouri and Alabama, but was acquitted. He was never extradited to Minnesota for the Northfield raid and literally got away with murder. In his final 30 years, Frank James worked a variety of jobs, including a shoe salesman in Nevada, Missouri, a burlesque theater ticket taker in St. Louis, and a telegraph operator in St. Joseph. He inherited the family farm after his mother's death in 1911, offering tours for 25 cents a head. There he died at the age of 72 on February 18, 1915. Annie kept the remains of her husband in a bank vault for decades. She died July 6, 1944, and 20 days later, the ashes of both were buried in Hill Park Cemetery. Please leave us a comment about this episode. If you liked it, we'd like to hear about that. And if you could give us a thumbs up, we would appreciate that as well. Tell your friends about History Hunters. Thank you so much.